Yes, I think we can start, Emanuela.
Sure, perfect. Okay, thank you, Alexandra.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. This is the second roundtable named Strategies, organized by the committee of the project Designforvulnerables. The School of Humanities, Social Sciences and Architecture of Tecnológico de Monterrey in Chihuahua started to work with vulnerable communities since several years ago, aiming to propose solutions and ideas for their necessities. Since these realities are becoming more and more complex, the issue that Designforvulnerables aims to understand is how can design contribute to empower vulnerable communities in the next few years, especially in this period of unprecedented changes and unedited crisis that we are living. I think the necessity to search for design solutions that will support the most vulnerable groups is becoming urgent. That is to say that not that we have not worked before this crisis on this subject, but kind of the pandemics rang the alarm and push us to speed our efforts. So Designforvulnerables is part of wider research activities implemented along in previous years within an international research network, mainly between Mexico, Italy, and China, whose focus is to understand the role of community dimension in developing sustainable territories. The leader of this project, as you all know, is Emanuele Giorgi. I had the honor of working with him in several projects. I'm a big fan of his work. We are also colleagues. I am also a research professor in Tecnológico de Monterrey in the School of Architecture, Art and Design. My name is Alexandra Krstić, and I will be moderating this session. The round table, as I said, is the second round table. The previous round table was held yesterday with a focus on the meaning of vulnerability. This round table today focuses on strategies. Strategies roundtable aims to highlight which global phenomena are impacting or will impact vulnerable communities. The contribution of these presentations today and the discussion today, we hope that it will help to understand the risks and the opportunities that must be considered for design in vulnerable communities. The presentations will be focused on global phenomena or on community scale. So how we organize the roundtable today is that first we will have 6 presentations, each one of 10 minutes. We have 6 prestigious researchers that will present their work. I would like to present Ercela Kripa and Steven Muller from Texas Tech, El Paso in the United States. They will present vulnerables architecture. Their presentation is about vulnerables architecture. The second presentation is from Professor Carlos Gauthier from the ENSAP in Bordeaux. He will present rebuilding vulnerables. The third presentation is from Professor Nivaldo Andrade from Bahia Federal University in Brazil, and he will present the favelas regeneration. The fourth presentation is Giulio Verdini from Westminster University, UK, and he will present rural China. The fifth one is Professor Ioanni Del Sante from Huddersfield University, UK, and he will present commons. And the final 6th presentation is from Professor Carlo Berisi from University of Pavia in Italy, and he will present participative groups. After these 6 presentations that will take around 1 hour, we will open the floor for questions and for discussions. I think approximately 15 minutes we could discuss the points that would be presented, and after that we can move to the breakout rooms and dedicate the next 30 to 45 minutes to the workshop itself. When the workshop finished at exactly 12 or 5 minutes before 12, we will reunite in the main room to finish the session. So, in order to not waste any more time, I would like to present Ercela Kripa and Steven Muller, who will be the first presenters today. Ursula Kripa is an assistant professor at Texas Tech College of Architecture. She holds a Master of Science in Advanced Architectural Design from Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, and a Bachelor of Architecture with honors from the New Jersey Institute of Technology. Her work has been widely published in Scapegoat, Mono, Volume, The Architect's Newspaper, Domus, Texas Architect, and others. Her work is located on the US-Mexico border, where she maps trans-border shared ecologies, urbanism, infrastructure, and exposes binational systems of control that affect human rights. Stephen Muller is also research assistant professor at Texas Tech College of Architecture, and his extensive experience is in advanced architectural construction, fabrication, digital design techniques, and urban research that informs his design philosophy and approach. Stephen has received numerous awards for his design work and scholarship, including the 2018 Emerging Voices Award from the Architectural League of New York, the Rome Prize in Architecture from the American Academy in Rome in 2010, and has done residency fellowships at the McDowell Colony in 2009 and 2013. Ursula, Stephen, please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I will share a PowerPoint. Please let me know. You see it, right? You see the cover page?
Yes, it's perfect. We see it.
Great. Thank you to everyone, and thank you, Emanuele, and Tec de Monterrey, and guests and colleagues. It's an honor to be here. We're happy to be here and to discuss this idea of design for vulnerable populations. Our work as architects and researchers and educators has focused for the past 15 years on exactly this issue. We thought today we would share recent work that describes our particular approach to a particular set of vulnerable populations, the populations impacted by and living along the US-Mexico border. We consider design for this population in a number of ways, as you'll see today, including architectural and urban design, but really most of our work centers first around the design of information. Information that is critical to this population is usually or often hidden or it's unavailable. And so our first task in design is first to gather information, to assess and to help these populations visualize the hidden information that impacts them. So we've worked recently, as you'll see, we'll share some of sort of the designed information and what I mean by this. Recently in 2020, last year, we worked with Amnesty International, which is a not-for-profit organization that works on human rights. We worked with them to visualize the dangerous overcrowding and mismanagement of federal and private immigration detention facilities, which has contributed to disproportionate rates of COVID-19 infections in the vulnerable immigration detainee population. And so looking at documents that Amnesty International obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, we were able to confirm, to geolocate, and to construct this map that you see here on the left. This map is live and it's online for anyone interested. And the idea was to categorize 200 federally operated immigration detention facilities in the US and to analyze their population capacity as well as their average and their capacity, like what they're allowed to, the number of population that are allowed to detain versus how many people were actually being detained in order to pinpoint to those that were dangerously overcrowded for COVID-19. Amnesty International used this report to advocate for the release of immigrants from detention centers during the COVID-19 pandemic while they're awaiting their paperwork. So the interactive web map of the facilities actually summarizes the findings in this graphics overlays that provides actually searchable and zoomable facility like data at the level of each facility in support of Amnesty's report. So if you zoom in on the map online much closer, you actually end up seeing, because we're architects and designers, also the layout and the building design and the locations of these facilities with sort of a map kind of overlay. And so while we're here on the border, a recent initiative is merging with an investigative territorial research that we're doing along with our design research. So we have developed this with within our academic roles at Texas Tech and in our new roles as directors of this new research center we have set up here at Texas Tech University that focuses on issues of urbanization and desertification on the US-Mexico border. We'll cover first some of the investigative work from this practice and then some glimpses into the academic design and research in the research center. Through this map here, you can see there are shifting patterns of ultraviolet exposure in North America, and they very closely align to the international border with high intensities, even in the winter months, intensifying at the southern US boundary with Mexico. So the 30th parallel, which crosses the borderland, is a charged exposure territory. With the effects of climate change, populations below this boundary will see increased risk of sunburn and other negative health effects related to UV ultraviolet exposure. So the lack of shade in the borderland landscape and the amount of atmospheric scattering from airborne or dust, as you all are familiar with who live in this region, increase the health risk to individuals who live in this area. But at the same time, the national security systems have become experts at deploying tactical infrastructures that actually mitigate the impact of ultraviolet radiation on its agents. So the agents and the infrastructures of control are very well shaded and protected. And so border agents are able to deploy, manage, and appropriate shade in the name of state security. State security forces navigate this kind of irradiated shade atmosphere, of the borderland, and they essentially control power relations because they control access to shade and to UV exposure. So building on these kinds of tactical interventions, the federal border security system has developed an appetite for shade in the borderland. So, and has continues to invest more and more in more permanent, more purpose-built structures in order to extend their cover and to strengthen their position in the landscape, resulting in an extensive inventory of shade structures that serve the security states. So there are shades at security checkpoints, as we've all witnessed, but not necessarily where people are waiting. And so at any port of entry, the problem is that shade is not a public amenity, but is highly privatized, and it's only provided to the security apparatus and not to the people who cross the border. And as we noticed 2 summers ago, the El Paso Ciudad Juarez Metroplex is one of the largest binational urban environments in the Western Hemisphere, where actually these kind of physiological effects of solar radiation are really mostly affecting vulnerable populations. This was a migrant processing overflowing site in El Paso, where people were being kept outside, not in shade, and kind of surrounded in these fences, where they are subjected to dehydration and UV exposure. And so shade here, more than anywhere in a desert city, is subject to unparalleled geopolitical and environmental stresses, is what has been described as an index of inequality, where the relationship of shade to people is very clear. The security forces are shaded and migrants are not. And so this was kind of the famous image that made it through the news media, which then brought attention back down to El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, where they started to kind of make a little bit of shade, but as you can see, is completely sort of inadequate and exposes people. And then Stephen will talk about a project about shade.
Yeah, we'll end with the complementary efforts that we're developing in the Research Center, which is called POST, the Project for Operative Spatial Technologies, and the project is called Irradiated Shade. In the center, we've been developing shade surplus, shade deficit, and irradiated shade maps of public spaces here in El Paso, Ciudad Juarez, using remote sensing and computational analysis to identify sites that are at particular risk of ultraviolet exposure. We're developing computational workflows and representational strategies to assess shade and the radiated qualities of shade. Mapping diffuse solar radiation, for instance, we can begin to see a clearly unequal asymmetrical distribution of UV protection. You see relatively low amounts of diffuse radiation in the yellow tones here, mostly in the urban core and areas with high slope and vegetation away from the border. The border here is the curved line at the center of the drawing, the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. As you approach the border and the international bridges, the exposure actually increases. So there's broad swaths of high exposure to diffuse radiation, covering some of the lowest codes in the city, and in fact, in all of the US, indexing what Ursula described as this index of environmental inequity. Using LiDAR, point cloud data, and GIS solar analysis tools, we can also understand the distribution of radiation at the block level, revealing in this case areas of relatively high protection against diffuse radiation within the urban core. But as we move closer to the border, conditions of general overexposure in red here are common as you approach the bridges. So we want to make this more visible as part of our design strategy, the design of information. So we borrow on some of these hidden logics that are built into solar analysis and GIS, or to develop our own tools to visualize and assess this condition of radiated shade, moving to a more immediate design and drawing environment. To better understand the impact of building geometry on UV exposure in urban space, we developed the spherical projection algorithm, which is able to describe areas of high and low exposure. Each intersection that we've mapped yields a different and highly articulated sky exposure map. You can see here, so we can identify which intersections and which pedestrian populations are most at risk. We're also developing the interface to map with other computational tool sets. Here we're looking at ways in which the sky dome geometry can merge with other environmental analysis tools. So we're using Ladybug, for instance, to map monthly averages of high and low solar radiation. And this is really a tool then that learners can use to design appropriately protective shade structures against UV radiation. We're developing these mappings, which are unrolled spherical projections and these kind of panorama style drawings, so that we can assess this in real time. We can basically see the whole sky rolled out before us and see the impact of any shade design that we imagine. And we've developed this, what we call the sky exposure catalog of each intersection within the borderland. They're color coded relative to the amount of ultraviolet exposure and risk. And we've begun to just explore possible forms for a structure to combat against the effects of ultraviolet scatter, especially UVB radiation, which will need to cover large areas while selectively masking the sky exposure that we've developed from the computational maps. We see this as just the beginning of developing an ability to address the biopolitics that are enmeshed in UV exposure and the provision of shade. In the borderland, we increasingly see vulnerable populations exposed to high UV radiation with an inability to adequately protect them. So we're discussing how to implement this in a public shade project with project partners. We hope this gives you a sense of the strategies that we deploy to make information affecting vulnerable populations available and legible to the actors and agencies who can impact change, and to the designers who will design conditions in response. And we're welcoming further discussion. Just a quick note, if you'd like to stay in contact or get involved, we've developed another entity called the Border Consortium for Actionable Spatial Research, which is actually supported here in our research center called POST, but is open to any US or Mexican or international designers or researchers who are invested in these kinds of cross-border investigations and projects.
So just quickly to close out, like the shade tools that Stephen was showing are actually software based, like Grasshopper script, and the Rhino and Grasshopper scripts. And the idea is to give them to architects and city officials as a tool to start to map the border region in a different way beyond just the sort of the sun exposure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Super interesting. Thank you so much. Now I would like to present Professor Carlos Gottlieb from the Superior National School of Architecture in Bordeaux, in L'Escape. Carlos is a director of the postgraduate program, Rebuilding the World. Please, Carlos.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alexandra. So I'm glad to be with you in this event. Excuse me, my English is not so good, but I try anyway to be clear. I'm a teacher, professor at the School of Architecture and Landscape of Bordeaux, France, and we opened a postmaster 5 years ago, called an ambitious name, Rebuilding the World. And well, the idea is to present this program, the philosophy of this program, the key concepts that are at the beginning of this program, and then at the end I would show some examples. So the key concepts of the postmaster Rebuilding the World are, first of all, the recognition of planetary phenomena that have consequence on human settlements, like Anthropocene and global changes. Second group of concepts are the new operating concepts to intervene in human settlement faced to these phenomena, as a resilience, ecological transition, and the growth, environment and identity and empowerment. And then new urban planning methods that are used in local urban planning, as the territorialism and the idea of local projects, and the transitory and tactical urban planning. That's also a new concept used in order to treat urban problems. The first group of concepts, the planetary phenomena, well, the Anthropocene, of course, it's very important to be conscious of it, of this new area in the history of the Earth. We can say that it starts at the post-Second World War, after the Second World War, and is due to the great acceleration of economic activities, energy and matter flows, human demography. I mean, it's the first time that is the geological change in the Earth due to the human activity. So the other concept, the second concept, very important, is the global changes. Is a set of development observed on the scale of the whole planet due to this, as I see in the Anthropocene phenomena, that has serious consequence in human activity and in environment. I mean, it's a global recognition, global change that are consequence in or the reasons are in democracy and urbanization, as increasing demand for energy, food resources, and various goods of services, the production of waste and various often toxic and diffuse pollution. I mean, now since some decennies, countries and governments have conscience in a global idea of this disaster could be advancing in the wars. So faced to this phenomena, what is interesting is the recognize new operating concepts to intervene in human settlement that are in application in research and in government policies. As the first of them is very important, is the concept of resilience. It's a term borrowed from physics that could be applied to the city, and it can be defined as the capacity of urban system to absorb a crisis that produce disturbances in an environment balance, social and economic organization, and also in these infrastructures. So, I mean, it's a new way of approach this crisis situation as in a positive way. The other phenomena to intervene the other concept to intervene face to this phenomena is the concept of ecological transition. I mean, it's the idea to put together a number of principles and practices after some experiments in territory relating to the idea of producing resilient effects. And some of them are the engaging a circular local economy, or preventing and reducing environmental, social, and territorial inequalities. And these principles are now in government agendas. Governments recognize these kind of principles and define in global, in different countries, actions to this finality. Another concept that also was studied is the, I don't know if the exact term is in English, the growth, the croissance, crecimiento in Spanish, and it's the idea of taking conscience and abandoning the idea of growth that in the way as it was used in the contemporary society. It's a concept that part of the idea that our society must lift a productivist process that began in the industrial era because the damage this process provoke in the planet, and also a reality of scarcity of resources, especially fossils. The growth is not only like a philosophy position, but it's a real concept that has to be studied in order to act in to fight of this phenomena. Another concept is very also studied by geography, is also by philosophy, is the concept of environment and identity together. The idea that human identity means a close relationship between a human being and his environment. But environment understood as a process in which natural and artificial are connected through history. And using this concept is possible to study with a new regard the growth crisis, and also to develop of a new notion of development using, as a matter of fact, identity as a vector of development in opposition to the holistic and universal values and this kind of universal regards that was assumed in the productivist regard to the development. And another concept very important is the concept of empowerment, the enabling process that allows communities understood as human groups that share interests and identity to increase over their to increase control over their lives, and it's in relation with this idea of local, of acting in local territory. And so nowadays there are new methods, new reflections of urban planning to track, face, or to use these concepts. And on one of the position is that for us very important in Europe is the position of the territorialist and the local projects. I mean, first with the understanding the territory as an abstract space where life cycles of individuals develop are developing without valuing the identity characteristic of the site and recognizing it as a sample means of economic activity. The territorialists assume the idea to return to the local territory, understood it as a common good for the inhabitants, as an element that produce biological or social life. I mean, also this idea don't abandon this universal holistic regards and and the globalization, of course, a phenomena that is the results, and acting to be opposite to this phenomena in a local, very, very local way. And another method which also is used to this phenomenon, uses this concept I talk about, are the concept of transitory and tactical urban planning, which interests architects and urban plannings because they promote citizen participation in the definition of community space with a playful approach, or provide a trial period, a temporary period in project spaces. So with all this material, we decided 5 years ago to open this postmaster with the finality to induce, to learn how to projects in this way of regarding the environment, also to understanding the project as a way to promote the emancipation of local populations through collaborative process. And also another concept is very important, and another principle we took is a way of seeing the action in a bottom-up way, recognition energies and resources as close as possible in the territory, not only physical, but also in a culture, in the approach of human groups to this territory. So the idea is, so with this, these principles, to work in new issues to the urban planning action in the territory, which is different to this we use in the productivist period. So I will show in this slide the three. This program is organized in 1 year and with the three, not semester, but 3 sequences of 4 months. And the first is one of the student. We decide to participate to this program, which is open to foreign students, which have a project that share our principles. So the first sequence with the tutoring and different courses, the student in Bordeaux work, improve his personal projects. The second sequence is an involvement through action. I mean, when the student in the first period define in his personal projects, it is invited in this second semester to go abroad to be received, and he work with the community and with the university. With them, we are in link in order to have a practical, very real approach of the problem he studied, and this idea of local also is very important. And at the end, the third sequence is the students come back to Bordeaux, and there's a feedback, you know, and exchange and evaluation and study of principle share in a general common way, but using the approach from experience in different parts of the world. So, well, this is one explanation of this. The first sequences, the idea to clarify the technology, you know, in all these principles I presented at the beginning, and also in a multidisciplinary way of investigation, as well as we are a school of landscape and architects. It's easy to us to have a different approach from landscape, geography, anthropology, etc., but also economical and political issues. The second sequence, which is very, for us, it's very important. Well, now it's complicating this pandemic period. Well, with Zoom it's possible to have also this kind of experience. We are sharing that. Well, but this sequence is very important. This idea of conduct one experiment in situ, on field, but abroad. It can be in France, but we prefer it could take place abroad. And well, the students are taking part of a structure with is integrate what in a team from the university that work, and it could experiment by himself in a short period of 2 months. One phenomena that is perhaps is not the exact term of his research, but is in relation at he allows he creates a new regard, a different regard in this process of research.
Sorry, Carlos, please let's wrap it up because we will not have enough time for the workshop. I'm sorry.
Okay. So I'm finished. Well, the second, the third sequence is this is that of experience. I would like just to show, if I can, to do that. Voilà. This just one experiment of one student that he spent his practical period in Guanajuato in order to study. It was a girl, a young woman, landscaper, that was interested in the problem of a rural growth of Guanajuato, and the idea has to create a new culture to appropriate in technical services of the theory in order to not allow the process of growing that we can see it is produced in these areas. So, well, the same students at the end of the program, he had a reflection of producing, of acting intervening in rural areas in Kinshasa, also in order to give some instruments to population, to rural migrate population that come to Kinshasa, and in general they build settlements in situations, the war situations of the territory, and the idea is take advantage of this energy, this culture of this population to convert the territory in general they are going, which is a theory that nobody wants to go there, but going there, creating a system with an ecophonic system that allow to regenerate this bad area, and also create a circular economy, a local economy, and an empowerment and emancipation phenomena. So, okay, excuse me, I was.
Thank you very much. Yes, I would just like to remind everyone that the presentation should be 10 minutes because we need time for the workshop at the end, no? So
okay.
Please keep to the
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. Yes. The third presenter is Professor Nivaldo Andrade from the Faculty of Architecture, Federal University de Bahia in Brazil. Professor Andrade was visiting researcher at the École d'Urbanisme de Paris in 2017. He also acted as a past president of the Institute of Architects of Brazil and former executive secretary of the Pan American Federation of Architects Association. Please, Professor Andrade, you have the floor.
Hello, I'd like to thank for the invitation to Emanuele Giorgi and Tiziano Cattaneo. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry for my English, it's not as good as my colleagues are. I've been asked to talk about strategies for favelas regeneration. So I'm going to present 6 strategies that we can find in the last decades, interventions in some favelas in Latin America, and particularly in Brazil. That's where I work and study and teach. The relationship between formal city and informal city is very important in Latin America, as we all know, from countries like Peru and Bolivia, where we are talking about around 40% of the society is living under informality, to countries like Mexico, 14%, or Chile, 9%. Brazil, we are around 28%. In some cities like Rio, these pictures from Rio, we have some areas where the most wealthy people live that's very close to large and huge favelas. And the name, of course, changes, but favela is a characteristic of Latin American processes of urbanization, considering that Latin America is the most urbanized region in the world. So these are some names that are used in different countries to name the same, more or less the same, because there are differences also, the same processes. The old strategy is still used in some countries, but was the main one to face the problem of the favelas, is to see it as a problem. And the solution was the elimination of favelas. There is a very interesting movie, Brazilian movie from 2002 called City of God, Cidade de Deus in Portuguese, that won a lot of prizes, that shows one of these settlements, these huge housing complexes built in the periphery of Rio, to house people that were expelled from eliminated favelas in the richest areas of Rio, and how those areas became areas of violence and controlled by the traffic dealers. So I'm going to present now the solutions developed for many decades, since the late 50s until the last years, and at the end I will summarize them. First one is autonomy, self-governing. The users must plan, build, and manage favelas, or at least have a participation in those processes. There is a very interesting phrase by John F.C. Turner, an English architect who arrived in Peru in the late 50s. He says, "They've showed me solutions that are problems and problems that are solutions." He's talking about favelas being presented as problems, where he thinks favelas in reality are solutions. And these huge housing complexes in the periphery that were shown as solutions that in reality were really problems. So he's talking about the barriadas, the favelas of Lima. He studied in the late 50s and 60s, where he found this self-help solution demonstrating the common people's initiative and the potential of their resources. And he finishes that publishing a lot of books. one of them in 76, where he talked about autonomous design and heteronomous design. He defends that the users or the popular sector should be able to participate with the public sector, with the public government, in planification, in planning, in building, and in managing these spaces. The second and third strategies are integration with formal city. There is a demand on integrating these favelas that many times are looked at as clusters, as fortress, as isolated spaces inside the city, spaces of informality, so the need to integrate it, and services, the need to provide access to basic urban and social services. So I'm going to talk about the most important program of regeneration of favelas in Brazil, held in the 90s in Rio de Janeiro, the second largest city of Brazil, one of the largest in Latin America. This program called Favela Bairro won a lot of prizes, was internationally recognized as an example of efficient state intervention in urban housing through government investment. The main goal was integrating the slums, favelas, into the legal city by providing access for the population of the favelas to basic urban and social services, as well as the regularization of its public and private spaces. Favelas are generally occupations of private lands or public lands, and the regularization of these lands are an important issue. Favela Bairro didn't intervene as much in houses as it intervened in public spaces and in social infrastructure. And it was very interesting because the interventions were done by groups of architects and other professionals, engineers, sociologists, selected by national competition organized by the Brazilian Institute of Architects, where these groups presented their previous experiences in the theme and proposed methodologies of intervention. These are some images on the top. What was a non-used place, a residual space where people used it to put garbage, was transformed in a kind of a park with sports courts, football court. In the bottom, you can see intervention in stairs, new buildings housing kindergartens and schools and health center, etc. The fourth strategy is resymbolization, the creation of strong visible marks. Recently, between 2002 and 2009, the Argentina-born architect Jorge Mario Jauregui, who lives and works in Rio for many decades now, designed a huge intervention to one of the largest complexes of favelas of Rio, o Complexo do Alemão. That is a complex of 15 favelas housing more than 60,000 inhabitants. So it's a very complex intervention. I would only highlight some of these ideas. It's sought as a social spatial structuring system. Among the main objectives, there is promoting and facilitating a new connectivity between the Complexo do Alemão and the surrounding neighborhoods, recomposing the existing centralities by introducing new ones, incorporating buildings of architectural and urban value, resymbolizing the place by creating strong visible marks. And this is the main highlight of this intervention. I'm going to talk about that in the sequence. Introducing high quality public equipment, promoting structural intervention, activating nerve points in the favela fabric, and reducing vehicular movement within the complex. The most shocking and important image of this intervention is the gondola lift system that has been created, articulating different parts of this huge complex, and the underground, that's not underground, the metro, the subway of Rio de Janeiro that touch the complex. So this solution tried to connect different parts of the Complexo do Alemão with the existing urban transport system of Rio de Janeiro. Each of the 6 gondola lift stations was designed as well as a social station, including public facilities such as digital libraries, legal support center, urban and social orientation office, service center, and areas for generating work and income. So I'm going to show pictures of two of those gondola lift stations that are also social stations. This is one of them. And I've raised the other one because of the time. They also, Jorge Mário Jauregui also created a civic center on the site of the old factory, an old factory that was not anymore in use, establishing a new centrality, including vocational training school, hospital, center for the generation of work and income, youth reference center, and a residential condominium. He implemented a park occupying the area of 3 deactivated quarries. We are talking about 3 square kilometers. And also new housing units designed by the architects, but not for new population, but for relocating residents that needed to be transferred from areas that were going to house the gondola lift stations and other equipments. And the restoration of internal circulation system and the treatment in terms of urbanism and landscape of existing living spaces, as well as creation of new public spaces and urbanization of residual spaces. The change is that the gondola lift became not only a symbol, a mark in the landscape and the symbol of the new Complexo do Alemão, but also the tourists. The tourists started to visit it, and there are people from the favela that nowadays live working as tourist guides to people who want to visit the complex that was known as a very violent complex and now is visited by tourists. Strategies number 5 and 6 are occupation of unused and residual spaces to create social dynamics and the participation. I mean, the participation of the people, the local people on designing these interventions. I'm going to talk about Espacios de Paz, in English, Peace Spaces, a program that began in Venezuela in 2014, organized by Pico Studio, who is a collective from Venezuela, but with the participation of architecture collectives from other countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Spain, and Mexico. Those are the 5 first interventions held in 2014. I'm going to show 2 of them. It's my last part of the presentation. This is Pico Salinas, one of the most violent favelas in Caracas, in the capital of Venezuela, where the first phase that was executed, that was built, was the construction of this plaza pública, this public space covered with this roof, with these steps, so people can meet, can start to be a meeting point. This was an empty house that was transformed in a kind of community center. And this intervention was designed by 3 offices of architecture, 3 collectives, all together with the community of Tres Marias de Pinto Salinas, with architects from Pico Studio, PKMN, and Oficina Lúdica. They designed with the community all the details of these elements in wood and steel. And those are pictures in the right side, how it was before the intervention, a residual space, an empty space with no use that was transformed in a meeting point, in a space of communitary, where people from the community can meet, etc. This is another experience of Espacios de Paz in another favela from Caracas, Petare, also from Pico Studio with PGRC and Todo por la Praxis. They transformed this house in a community center. In the rooftop, they created this basketball court, as we see in this picture. So to summarize my presentation, 6 strategies we could talk about regenerating favelas or favelas upgrading, as has been called, are autonomy, integration, services, resymbolization, occupation of unused spaces or residual spaces, and participation of the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Our 4th presenter is Professor Giulio Verdini. He's a reader at the School of Architecture and Cities of the University of Westminster, UK, and visiting professor at the Polytechnic University Mohammed VI in Morocco. He has led participatory design workshop in rural towns in China and Europe, and today he will present about rural China. Please go ahead, Professor.
Thanks, Alessandra, for the introduction, and thanks also to Emanuele and Tiziano for inviting me. I'm really glad also to see some faces that I have never visualized. I just read names, so that's really good. Let me just share the screen now. And I guess you should now see the screen. So today in the 10 minutes that I have, I would like to present some work that I have done in the last 5 years, which I title like strategies for peripheral settlements, hoping that this could be helpful for the students that are facing the problems of a small community in Mexico, Paso del Norte. And by the way, very congratulations on how you have organized the whole work and the video that show us the community, despite the fact that we are all very far from you. I hope this can be of interest. It's based on experiences, of course, not based in Mexico or Latin America or Central America, but is actually in China and Europe. A few years ago, we started gathering information for a work that I have done for UNESCO. Then the last 5-6 years, I've been working for UNESCO for various reports. And at some point, UNESCO was preparing a big global report called the Global Report of Culture for Sustainable Urban Development, published in 2016. And it was the contribution of UNESCO for the launching of the UN, the new urban agenda in Quito, and which was all about placing culture, let's say, at the core of global development agendas and so on and so forth. And one of the point of the report was to, of course, apart from raising awareness on this and broad topic, was also to talk about specific features on how this can be faced, and particularly the topic of urban-rural linkages and how to strengthen this linkage through culture and education. I hope this can be of interest because, of course, despite the fact that the work in general of UNESCO is not about, let's say, tackling poverty or vulnerable groups, but it is about really, as all the UN agencies, thinking about how, for instance, in their mission, culture, educational activities can help to fight poverty. And the work that we have done was to gather different cases across the world from various countries, showing how in small, medium settlements, what I call peripheral settlements, no matter if they are relatively remote or part of large metropolitan areas, peripheral to that urban context, how they could achieve local sort of creative, but also innovative, inclusive pattern of development, trying to challenge what are the mainstream practices for development. And therefore, what can we learn from those cases in terms of designing new policies, new integrated policies for focus on culture, focus on knowledge, understanding knowledge and how this can be used for local development, and also, again, education. And I would say also more recently in the latest report, how to reduce the digital gaps, which actually has been extremely crucial and important in particular in the last month during the COVID. I will present here mainly the work for the global report of 2016, but then last year, just before the COVID, I was editing another report on rural urban development, specifically based on a few villages in Sichuan, where basically we were highlighting a real digital revolution in the countryside of China, which was actually one of the main reasons why the country could cope very well in the first period with the COVID. Then, of course, they used different methods to fight that quite effective, but that's another story. And all the material that I'm mentioning, you can all find online and you can download in open source. So it's the reference is there. Now, in support of that, as of course, this is not just a theoretical work of sort of policy dialogue, but it was based on real experiences. The report was backed by various cases. Two of them I was directly involved in those projects, done together with ILAUD, which is the International Laboratory of Architecture and Urban Design, very sort of laboratory set up a few decades ago. I'm not going into the history now. You can find the link and have a look if you're interested in. And this is the cases that I would like to mention. One is Shuangwan in China. This was a workshop. It was a work for a local government that resulted into a participatory design workshop in 2015. And then another one is instead in Italy, in the south of Italy. So I will very quickly also mention the Italian one because it has a component of education for the youth, which probably could be of interest for your community, given the fact that, at least for what I understood from the video, there's an issue with how to deal with the kids and so on and so forth. You can find this published also recently in an article. Sorry, why I cannot, yeah. In short, what we explored in both cases was about different pathway to sustainable regeneration based on culture-led, but also thinking about, first of all, culture, not just in terms of what is as I said before, the mainstream, and which is too often easily associated with the cultural aspect and tourist development, but also cultural in broader sense. I will show you later. And then thinking in terms of place-based local economic opportunities, what we can learn from places and what we can achieve with limited resources, because normally those contexts, those areas have limited resources. They might have potential resources, but which are in a way unexplored. And by doing that, also by engaging local communities and local people to achieve that. The first case, Shuangwan, is located in the big metropolitan area of Shanghai and Suzhou, is actually part of this very dense urban, rural territory and morphology, if you like, and is an area that has been deeply affected by urbanization, in the sense that in the surrounding area of the town and the small village that was object of study, there are all the dynamics of the Chinese cities, like fast growing and so on. And that actually had an implication in the local town in particular, because it was due to this expansion of urban areas that actually there was a problem affecting the local agriculture for policy reason. I'm not going into the details, but in any case, the town was forced by the upper level to rethink and to reclaim some of the agricultural areas for fish pond, which was quite profitable, if you like, towards other sort of agricultural activities, losing some of the potential income. And at that time, there was quite a visionary leader of the village, of the town, which asked us to work together to define and to co-produce together with the local inhabitants some potential visions for the town. Now, the aspect here that I want to raise and to underline, which I think it's quite interesting, is that in the end, while they were focusing on agriculture, on certain aspects to reprofile the local economy and so on, we also discovered that the town was quite dynamic in terms of producing, for instance, with home-based enterprises, clothes, garment, and then to sell those online through platforms, through online platforms in China. Telling the story, telling, if you like, the story that those sort of even business model, if you like, which are depending on cultural aspect, can be quite interesting and needs to be, if you like, highlighted and also supported. So the scenarios that we developed were not only based on agricultural development, but also on strengthening these business activities and linking all these aspects together. And the participatory workshop was very useful for the farmers to understand the rationale of those working in the textile sector and the other way around. So it was a real process of collective learning and sharing of experiences, which then materialized in meetings, in participatory workshops. And here you can see some pictures. Finally, the whole proposal, the whole package was submitted by the local leader to the upper government, and then they got funding for instance, improving the public realm. Here you can see the before and after, so with some tangible results. Then not all could be achieved, But what we learned from this case was the fact that actually and hopefully this could be something that can be applicable also in your case. There's a need of discovering those skills, abilities, and intangible resources which are somehow well beyond the traditional one, but are part of the culture of the place. And this, as I said before, actually in the case of Shangwan, was basically an interesting business model based on home-based enterprises. And also understanding those settlements as a part of integrated networks well beyond the locality. So actually either embedded in regional development opportunities or strategies, or even in digital networks. And that was the case of this town. The limits, of course, is that the civic engagement, the participatory approach was in a way limited. That was a sort of institutional limit, given the fact that the migrants were not involved in that process. And also the volatile political leadership, because once those suggestions were, some of the preliminary suggestions were achieved, then the leadership moved away from that and somehow forgot the project. Another case, and I'll mention this in a really couple of minutes, no more, is instead in the south of Italy. There's many cases from Europe, so I won't mention the usual stuff, but I think this is interesting for an aspect, because that was, first of all, there was no particular, in that sense, policy attention or stronger governmental support, given the fact that it's in a region where institutions are quite weak, but instead the civil society was very active, and there was a group of people. Here you can see some pictures of the place. Non-local, was a group of scholars, actually based in Texas, Houston, in nanotechnology, that they elected that place as their own place for running their own annual gathering and hosting an event where to just go there and discuss and so on. So it's a typical example of event-led regeneration, if you like, or development. In a way, with limited impact on the community. But what they did, they started to embed this experience in the town. For instance, initially by involving the kids of the town and also involving those like with the level of education or teachers and so on, to volunteer for working with kids, and to provide also online experiences with those scientists based everywhere in the world. So to in a way, to connect this place with the outside world, again, through digital platforms. They asked us to come and to organize a participatory design workshop. Actually, I was talking about with them, and we were preparing the global report of UNESCO, and I was trying to gather cases, and then it was the other way around. So after we highlighted that experience as interesting, they invited us, after the publication of the report, to do a real work there. And it was a participatory workshop, again, similar to the previous one, involving communities and asking their vision for the development. And the result was actually quite interesting, because we could highlight potentials, opportunities, but also discover lots of micro-scale activities, again, in that case, linked to agricultural activities and so on. And to try to reconnect that with the local expertise, which was brought by this group of nanoscientists, and applying, for instance, nanoscience to agriculture for cosmetics, for health, and so on and so forth, showing that actually there's always the need of sort of taking an approach to design, which is not just physical design, but is also about institutional design, is also about connecting things, no, in a way. And the learning is that these events that can sort of jump into places can leave anything on the ground, but also instead, if well prepared and well designed, can mobilize local resources and also energize communities towards certain goals. And also educational activities in that sense could provide a sort of platform for engaging the youth and so on. The limits of that is that there might be lack of long-term benefits of these activities if they don't provide them structural changes to the places. And also there's the need to embed such strategies more, I mean, beyond the locality again, as in a way, the previous case. So the process of sustainable co-design, and this is the bit of it, the summary of the presentation, is that it should be based on rethinking the strategic, and today in the digital, in the COVID scenario, I would say even the digital use of local resources, so reconsidering, recomponing, and envisioning potential and possibilities, pursuing effective local and inclusive governance through participation, co-production of development options, but also, and this is quite crucial for every single small-scale settlements, pursuing effective vertical integration in wider networks to avoid the so-called lock-in effect that would instead prevent any possibility. I think it's something that you might have, a problem that you might also have in your community when, I mean, I guess you were mentioning about accessibility and how that community could be part of wider networks. So here is a list of ways to envision more sustainable future for these settlements by sort of stimulating local economies, developing niche markets, business model for more global markets, engaging communities, assessing those skills beyond the traditional ones, skills that the community can have and can be used, rethinking creatively the education in a more also inclusionary way beyond the formal schooling, and positioning those settlements in wider context. Again, there are risks, but also there are let's say possibilities to explore way to go beyond that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Redin. Let's move to the fifth presenter, is Professor Ioane Del Sante from the Huddersfield University, UK. Professor Del Sante is reader in urban design at the University of Huddersfield and senior research fellow in architectural and urban design at the University of Pavia, Italy. His expertise is in the areas of urban commons and urban transformations in both Europe, South America, and China. And today, his presentation is exactly focused on those commons. Please go ahead, Professor Del Sante.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the invitation and the organization of this initiative, which I find very, very interesting. And please do interrupt me at the end of the 10 minutes so that I know and I can wrap it up. So let me manage it. Okay, so I will try to be very brief, and I've never spoke about this topic in relation to vulnerables, but I think that very interesting. There are some good kind of overlap, in between commons and common practices with the kind of the topic of your workshop and your activity. And I have listed here some kind of key features, which I will not be able to unfold all through my presentation, but which I think are key research questions for us and for the students. And so in what sense commons can support this logic and the co-production and the co-design of projects for the vulnerables? I think these are kind of the key words. So being non-extractive, and by coupling, the formation process with the idea of the project itself as a process. And then it's also questioning the role of architects during our, education, but also our professional life, but also our position in society as architects, but also as active citizens, maybe. And I will very, very briefly touch on a couple of items to introduce you to the topic, especially for the students who may not know where this is coming from. And so, commons, historically speaking, were meant to be or are resources which were used by local communities, basically accessed and used by local communities. But at the same time, since the 1990s, there have been a lot of studies by Elinor Ostrom in terms of economics and how these economies, may sustain or self-sustain over time. And more recently, over the last 5 to 10 years, there has been a lot about urban commons, so commons in our cities, and how to define them and how to address, sustain, and how to say, and the struggles related to these experiences. Very interestingly, there has been just one competition, design competition on the commons, which took place in 2015, organized by LSE in London. The website is not accessible anymore, but I mean, there are some probably projects which have been self-published somewhere else on the web. And my personal take on it was thanks to a case study which is in Milan, which is called Macau, and which speaks about basically the occupation of a vacant building in town to address a number of issues, including the uneven nature of urban transformations, but also the exploitation of workers in the creative industry. And this took place in 2011, and then they kind of settled down in a vacant building in town, which they took care of and transformed, which is still ongoing. And this is to say that at least, from my kind of literature review, if you like, I tend to define urban commons as the coincidence of at least 3 conditions, which are the idea that you have some resources, so a common pool of resources, the idea that these resources are accessed by a self-defined social group, so a kind of a local community, if you like, which can self-define itself, but also that these resources are used accordingly to specific rules or protocols or a governance which may or may not be agreed with the local council. And there are some publications there which you can access if you want to look a little bit more into these kind of matters. I just want to expand a little bit on the idea that this seems a little bit far away from architecture. However, what we did is to kind of establish the connections and the overlap in between these cases and the theoretical background. So Eleanor Ostrom in the first place, but other scholars, very well, renowned scholars like David Bollier, for example, because there are issues in terms of how do you access these, how do you exclude someone else from accessing these, and how do you regulate them, okay, as I was mentioning before. But at the same time, there are very interesting bits about the potential conflicts that the uses of these resources may imply. And so, for example, in Milan, we ran participatory workshops with another vulnerable, if you like, community of social housing dwellers, and especially an elderly community of dwellers, which, for example, do not recognize very much or do not take any advantage, or they perceive so, from the existence of this community. And then other bits which are very interesting, I think, to myself, is the how to say the governance, or to better say the functioning of this ecosystem works in relation also to the space, but also to the so-called digital commons. So in relation, for example, to Bitcoins and the idea of having, a self-regulated kind of financial system, which is outside of the market. And now for the students, I'll try to wrap it up by briefly explaining what I've been doing over the last couple of years in Pavia with a number of different cohorts of students. And the first bit is about mapping. So what does it mean, and where are, and if, what are the commons really? And so we have been producing, on the basis of some studies, some precedents like Athens or Istanbul some others in Brazil, a kind of a mapping of urban spaces by overlapping at least, you know, the 3 layers of people, uses, and spaces, meaning that those spaces are being activated, and those commons do not exist without having common practices which are taking place in them. And of course, this must be a kind of not just participatory action, but also something which is disseminated beyond academia. And so we did it through exhibitions in town. And of course, our students then developed some of these, we call them potential commons. So those are commons which may not be activated yet, but where there are the conditions for users or some specific groups to activate those places. And these are, you know, some of the outcomes of the activity, which has taken place in like vacant shops in town, but also, you know, vacant roads in town, roads which are not serving as roads anymore. And this then brought things to the next level, if you like, when we ran in Pavia a summer school last year, sorry, in 2019, which was called The City as a Commons, and it was very much interdisciplinary. So we had students from various faculties, and so it was architects, planners, you know, geographers, social scientists. And the very interesting bits to me is that the way in which we looked at places which we have always designed in our past was radically different by the idea of thinking them as commons, as a pool of resources which should be kind of activated by active citizens or some other groups. And so in this case, the process and the protocols are kind of preceding the architectural project and the design activity, which is kind of fitting what I was kind of pointing out early on. And this was like kind of our intuition. And then these final slides are a kind of reflects a kind of a survey which I did with my own students about the role of architects. And it's very interesting how, you know, the kind of thinking is opening up not just new ways of teaching, but also new ways of learning potentially. And the idea of having, you know, an architect which is basically an enabler or a coordinator of various processes with various stakeholders, but also, you know, upgrading, if you like, the skills which we are requiring to the students and which students understand themselves, they're kind of essentials to their agency. And so finally, I do not have an answer, but I have some mottos, which are the mottos which came out of these experiences, as we may see the role of architects in relation to the commons, and I would say in relation also to the vulnerables, as you put it in this nice initiative. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor Bressan. How interesting. Let's move to the last presentation, please. Professor Carlo Berizzi. He's Associate Professor of Architectural and Urban Design in the University of Pavia, where he coordinates the Architecture Maker Lab Research Laboratory. His research focuses on urban transformations, open space, and innovative housing models. And since 2018, he has coordinated the Mobile Home Research Program for Sustainable Tourism. Please go ahead, Professor Berizzi. We cannot hear you, Professor Berizzi, but we see the presentation.
Sorry, okay. I will speak about the research made in 2019. The year of Matera was the European Capital of the Culture. And this topic, the problem of the rebirth of abandoned village was quite important. And it is still important now in the Italian debate for the problem that we have for the pandemic situation, in which someone is thinking about how repopulate abandoned village. And I just introduce this topic of the population of villages in the inner areas in Italy. Normally in Italy, we are used to consider a sort of dualism and a national divide between north and south. This is because it is connected with the average income on the country, but probably there is a most important national divide connected with what we call the inner areas. We define inner areas as territories far from essential services that normally are guaranteed by the Constitution. I mean, education, health, mobility, infrastructural system, and so on. And these inner areas involve half of the municipalities in Italy. Italy is a particular country in which we have over 8,000 municipalities. And it is referred to 60% of the Italian territory and involve the 22% of the Italian population. So this is a very big problem. And the classification of the inner areas, it is based on the distance from these essential services like education and mobility and so on. Of course, the problem is a problem of the post-modernity. In the pre-modernity in Italy, I will speak about the relation between cities and villages that are for the more than 80% in the mountains, because Italy is totally crossed by mountains. And in the pre-modernity, of course, in the city there were the main services, but the services were spread around in the countryside and in the mountain. A very important point is I don't know exactly how to translate in English fondovalle, but there's valley bottom. So the connection between the mountain and the countryside around the city. Because during the modernity, in this node, the valley bottom, they grow a lot of industrial settlements because they need, for example, water that come from the mountain for the production. They need population workers from the villages that were around in these areas. And so in the modernity, I mean, in the 20th centuries, the 19th and 20th century grow a lot these intermediate nodes between cities and mountains. And in these intermediate nodes, they start to grow hospitals, schools, infrastructural system, railway, and so on. But in the post-modernity, when there is a process of the industrialization of our territories, these important nodes for services that was on the base of the surviving situation of the villages was interrupted because, as everybody knows, the metropolitan areas are growing and growing a lot. So the phenomenon of the population increase a lot. So during the modernity, the localization of essential services between cities and villas was very important for the growth of the villages, and this is allowed to grow of the economical things, the build of infrastructural system, and presidium and protection of natural and anthropic system that was used for industry. We saw as in the post-modernity, the close of the essential services, the decrease of the economy value, and the need of maintenance on the infrastructural system like railway and street that they built. In Italy, we have, for example, this important problem of the bridges that now are very obsolete. It's very complicated to make intervention. And especially the deteriorated environment, interruption of ecological corridors and system, polluted rivers, contaminated soils, and deteriorated landscape for the abandon of productive building and presence of underused speculative buildings. So this is a very important cause of the problem of the population. And so I will speak about some example of village rebirth. The terms that I use in Italy is borghi. I don't know exactly how to translate, but it's something that looks like this picture. So you can focus on which is the problem. Most of them are in the mountain and as an historical value, even for the heritage, of course, of our countries. So why now there is a sort of rebirth of these areas? Because they are an alternative of the urban life. So they propose a slow life in contrast with the urban stress, sustainable use of resources in contrast with energy consuming cities, care of the territory, and this is a very important aspect, in contrast with the soil depletion and hydrological instability of our cities, shared lifestyle, again, the loneliness of the metropolitan citizens, and health and environmental quality against the pollution and health risks. So of course, these are the reason why people in sometimes want to come back to this dimension. Protagonists of the rebirth of the villages are inhabitants, the survivors in some way of this post-modern situation that normally act with a cooperative system and defining political district, or returning inhabitants that born in this area, maybe study and start to work in a metropolitan situation, and after they come back with their experience, or new inhabitants that choose a new kind of lifestyle. I just present you some of these examples that is a part of a huge research. One of the most popular cases is the case of Suciso. Suciso in 1950 has 1,000 inhabitants, 7 bars, 2 restaurants, shops, schools, and a cheese factory. And in 1990s has 63 inhabitants without no activities. Okay, in Suciso, the 63 inhabitants, in the reality 9 persons, decided to establish a cooperative system to put together all, to come back to the production of the Castelmagno cheese. So coming back to the production of this cheese and creating service for the community in some way, substituting to the political system. So for example, they organize the transport for elderly people to the doctor, to bring the medicine to the villages and so on. And in these 20 years of activities, they come back to have a restaurant, a mini market, and a hotel for 20 people, 27 ships. And this case is very popular, and he got a lot of EU awards for sustainable development. The idea was that the community put together to solve all the problems together. Another important case is the case of Fontecchio. We are in the case in a land that was in the center of the seismic event of 2009, and this caused a very important depopulation. And so 5 little villages decided to work together to start to apply for European financial funds, because a unique village has no the energy to make this. So they make a sort of join in this project called the Borghi Attivi. And what is important is in this case, the project is based on participation decision-making to get the financial funds. So they decide exactly, for example, taking consideration all the village, which are the building that they have to restore first, which are the activity that they have to come back. And so they, little by little, they come back to attract a new economy and to restore the villages that were demolished partially by the seismic event. And now Fontecchio and the other municipalities are members of an international network to share knowledge against the population. Other cases, I go very quick, just to have an overview, and after, if you want, we can discuss about, is the case of the returning inhabitants, and sometimes connected with cultural activities. This is a Luperton example that is a cultural center and a film school based, again, on the cooperative action. The presence of this cultural center, that is a new building, attract more than 50 new inhabitants under 40 years old. This is another important element to attract young generation. Thanks, for example, the high connectivities for the remote working. That is one of the problems of the inner areas. The intervention, architecturally speaking, is based on the respect on the character of the place. This is, for example, the cultural center designed by a series of architects together with Antonio De Rossi, who is a professor in Polytechnic of Turin, and with the idea of interpretation of the local character. So here you can see just the new building and some of other details that express the contemporary intervention, but with the idea to come back to the tradition of the materials and languages. Another case, this is the case of new inhabitants, is the case of the scattered hotel. It means the spread hotel in all the village. In this case, in the Castello di Postignano, it was a medieval village abandoned since 1960 for geological problems. A company decided to buy most of the building and tried to make an investment, making a hotel, scattered hotel, second houses, and commercial and touristic activities. So totally in the direction of the tourism. This, for example, allowed people, especially foreign people, to live in a sort of community lifestyle, sharing time and spaces, and giving this kind of experience that is very connected to our tradition, as in this picture that you can see. That's very interesting, the relation between the open spaces and the closed spaces. This is more a seasonal villages, because it works better in summer times. And other example is, again, a new inhabitants, is the case of Gesk, where an association together with some universities start the restoration to the village with a philological approach. In this case, the interest is that Gesk is a sort of permanent laboratory of research on traditional constructive technique through local materials. So they organize workshops with students at university, with workers, to study the traditional constructive techniques, starting from the local materials. So this is another interesting intervention. I go to the last example, is Torri Superiore. In this case, an association based in Turin, so the citizen from metropolitan areas, decided to establish a community in this abandoned village. There were only one habitant in 1989. And with the idea of sharing time and space in a sustainable way. So, for example, in Torri Superiore, they have common kitchens, they have a common living room, they share laboratories and so on. And so they eat together, something like this. And they establish to a guest house to attract some little economies from tourists. And of course, people can work in a remote way. So it is a good connection that allows to live out of the metropolitan areas. I repeat, these are citizens that come back from the metropolitan city of Turin. Just to go to the end of this presentation, that it is held in a publication that is in Italian, that is Borgheri Nati, and express some the problem and some solution. The specificity think of this rebirth of villages, that every village has its own characteristic due to the place, due to the historical value, and even for the origin of the rebirth. Sometimes it's an American tourist that fall in love with this landscape and decide to move from United States to this place, or singer like Sting that move in Tuscany to live in a different kind of landscape. Sometimes very important, the cooperative system the idea to share energy, especially to solve the problem of the lack of services. And the urban culture has a very good impact in the idea of creating new economies. And so especially in inhabitants that come back to the original places. And what we miss now in Italy is to create an important national strategy to direct action, because as you know, population is increasing in the contemporary city. We cannot solve the problem of 4,000 villages, and probably we have to decide exactly where it's possible to make intervention or not. For example, even in consideration of some dramatic situation that we have in seismic areas of Italy, where it is very complicated to make this kind of transformation. So thank you very much. And it was a pleasure to participate to this intervention.
Thank you so much for all the presenters. Fascinating presentations. And I would like to say that I'm so pleased to see how the aspect of all your work is also on design social processes, not only in physical form, because I believe that the social innovation has to be in the center of the design for vulnerable groups. So, because it is a tool that we have to reshape the power dynamics, the appropriation of space, of the appropriation of territory. So thank you very much. Because we ran a little bit out of time, I propose that we move the discussion to the breakout rooms. Previously, we were thinking to give 15 minutes for discussion inside the main room, but I propose that we separate in groups and we bring the discussion into the groups. Emanuela, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much again, Sandra, all the presenters. Yes, the idea is that we move this discussion within the groups. So now I am opening the breakout rooms with groups and experts. So please feel free to discuss all the topics related with the presentation or with the project. We don't have so much time, so maybe we can have just one group for expert. But then if you want to leave before earlier, you just come out and we stop here. Okay, so here are the groups. I think that now we have the invitation. Everybody have the invitation already here in the desktop. You can join the groups. Muy bien. Ya están todos en breakout rooms. Sandra, ¿tú quieres ir con alguien a asistir a una breakout room?
Pues sí, porque no veo razón por qué me quedo aquí en el main room, ¿no? Solo esperar. Sí, puede entrar.
¿Hay alguna preferencia de ir con alguien que te gustó la presentación o...?
Pues me gustó este profesor de Brasil, Andrade, o también Ursula and Steven from Tech University, from Texas Tech. Tal vez con Ursula and Steven. O profesor Andrade, si no hay personas en su grupo. Puedo ir allá.
Mira,
porque el contexto latinoamericano es más cerca de que yo trabajo, por eso.
Mando ahí la 1 con Andrade.
Ok, perfecto, me voy allá. Entonces, tú vas a